Once, Anātha-piṇḍika, the treasurer, gathered his 500 friends, disciples of other schools, and went to Jetavana. He brought with him a vast array of offerings: garlands, perfumes, unguents, oil, honey, molasses, cloths, and cloaks. After respectfully greeting the Blessed One, he presented his offerings and handed over medicinal oil and other items to the order of the brethren. Following these rituals, he took his seat, avoiding the 6 faults in sitting down. His disciples from other schools also saluted the Buddha and sat close to Anātha-piṇḍika, marveling at the Master's countenance, radiant as the full moon, adorned with the signs of Buddhahood, enveloped in light, and exuding the rich glory that accompanies a Buddha. In a voice that resembled a young lion's roar in the Red Valley or a storm cloud in the rainy season, the Blessed One preached the truth to them. His thunderous tones, though powerful, carried an eightfold perfection that captivated the listeners, weaving a discourse full of sweetness and diverse beauty. Inspired by the Master's words, the disciples rose with converted hearts. With due salutations to the Lord of Knowledge, they renounced other doctrines and sought refuge in the Buddha. Henceforth, they accompanied Anātha-piṇḍika to Jetavana, carrying offerings, to hear the truth in the monastery. They embraced charity, observed the commandments, and upheld the weekly fast day. Later, the Blessed One returned to Rajagaha from Savatthi. Unfortunately, in his absence, these disciples abandoned their newfound faith and reverted to their original doctrines. After 7 or 8 months, the Blessed One returned to Jetavana. Once again, Anātha-piṇḍika, accompanied by his friends, approached the Master, offering perfumes and other items. They disclosed how, during the Buddha's alms pilgrimage, they had forsaken their refuge, returning to their former beliefs. The Blessed One, with a voice akin to a casket of jewels, scented with divine fragrances, inquired if the disciples had indeed forsaken the 3 refuges for other doctrines. Unable to conceal the truth, they confessed. The Master then emphasized the unparalleled excellences of the 3 gems, citing sacred texts that highlighted the Buddha's supremacy among all beings. He explained that those seeking refuge in the 3 gems, endowed with peerless excellences, are liberated from rebirth into states of suffering, entering the realm of devas to receive great glory. However, the Master continued his teachings, emphasizing that meditation on the thoughts of the Buddha, the truth, and the brotherhood leads to the paths to bliss. Despite this guidance, the disciples had gone astray by forsaking such a refuge. In response to their confusion, the Blessed One recounted an analogy from the past. Those who mistakenly considered false refuges as real fell prey to demons and were destroyed, while those who clung to the absolute truth prospered. Upon hearing this, Anātha-piṇḍika praised the Blessed One and requested clarification on the past events. The Master explained that, through countless eons and by displaying the 10 perfections, he attained omniscience to dispel the world's difficulties. He urged them to listen closely, comparing it to filling a tube of gold with lion's marrow, as he revealed the concealed truth, akin to releasing the full moon from the upper air, the birthplace of the snows. Once upon a time in the city of Benares, in the Kasi country, there ruled a king named Brahmadatta. During those days, a wise and experienced man, known as the Bodhisattva, was born into a merchant's family. As he grew older, the Bodhisattva engaged in trade, journeying with 500 carts filled with valuable goods from Benares. In the same city, there was another young merchant, not as clever and lacking resourcefulness. At the particular moment in our story, both the Bodhisattva and the foolish young merchant had prepared 500 carts each for their upcoming journeys. The Bodhisattva, foreseeing potential challenges, contemplated the difficulties of traveling together with a total of 1,000 carts. He pondered on the scarcity of resources like wood, water, and grass for the men and oxen. To address this, he decided that either he or the foolish young merchant must go first. The Bodhisattva called the other merchant and expressed his thoughts, suggesting that it would be impractical for both of them to travel together. He asked the young merchant whether he preferred to go first or last. Realizing the benefits of going first, the foolish young merchant considered having an intact road, the best grass for his oxen, prime herbs for his men's curry, undisturbed water, and the ability to set his own prices for bartering goods. Thus, he replied, I will go first, my dear sir. On the flip side, the Bodhisattva considered the benefits of going last. He reasoned to himself, if others go first, they will smooth out the rough parts of the road. I can follow their path, and their oxen will have eaten the old coarse grass, leaving behind sweet new growth for my oxen to graze on. My men will discover fresh and sweet herbs for curry where the old ones were picked. If there is a shortage of water, the first caravan will have to dig wells for themselves, and we can drink from those wells. Negotiating prices can be tedious, but if I follow later, I can trade my goods at the prices they've already set. Recognizing these advantages, he said to the other merchant, Then go ahead first, my dear sir. All right then, I will go first, agreed the foolish merchant. He harnessed his carts and began his journey. As he traveled, he left the inhabited areas behind and entered the outskirts of the wilderness. Now, there are 5 types of wilderness: those infested by robbers, those inhabited by wild beasts, those affected by drought, those haunted by demons, and those plagued by famine. The first type is when the path is filled with robbers, the second, with lions and other wild animals, the third, when there is no water for bathing or drinking, the fourth, when demons are present on the road, and the fifth, when no roots or other food can be found. In this particular wilderness, it was both a drought and a demon-infested wilderness. So, the young merchant loaded his carts with large water jars and filled them with water, preparing to traverse the 60 leagues of desert ahead. When he reached the middle of the wilderness, the goblin who dwelled there thought to himself, I will make these men discard their water supply and devour them when they are weakened. Using his magical powers, he created an exquisite carriage drawn by pure white young bulls. Accompanied by 10 or 12 goblins carrying bows, quivers, swords, and shields, he rode towards them like a mighty lord in this carriage. He adorned himself with blue lotuses and white water lilies around his head, with wet hair and wet clothes, and with muddy carriage wheels. His attendants, both in front and behind him, followed suit with wet hair and clothes, garlands of blue lotuses and white water lilies on their heads, and bunches of white lotuses in their hands. They were chewing the edible stalks and dripping with water and mud. Caravan leaders have a custom: when the wind blows against them, they ride in front of the caravan with their attendants to avoid the dust. When the wind is at their backs, they ride at the rear of the column. As the wind was blowing against them on this occasion, the young merchant was leading in front. When the goblin noticed the merchant's approach, he moved his carriage aside from the path and greeted him warmly, inquiring about his destination. The caravan leader also pulled his carriage to the side to let the carts pass. While he stood by the way, he addressed the goblin. We are on our way from Benares, sir. But I see that you have lotuses and water lilies on your heads and in your hands, and your people are chewing the edible stalks, and you are all muddy and wet. Did it rain while you were on the road, and did you come across pools covered with lotuses and water lilies? Upon hearing this, the goblin exclaimed, What did you say? Look there, the dark green streak of the forest is visible, and beyond that, it's nothing but water throughout the forest. It's always raining there, the pools are full, and all around are lakes covered with lotuses and water lilies. As the line of carts passed by, he inquired about their destination. The reply came, To such and such a place. The goblin further asked about the goods in each cart. When he reached the last cart, which seemed heavily laden, he questioned, What might you have in this last cart that moves as if it were heavily laden? The response came, Oh, there's water in that. The goblin suggested, You did well to carry water from the other side, but there is no need for it now, as water is abundant ahead. So, break the jars and throw the water away to travel easier. Continue on your way. We have stopped too long already. The goblin then went a little further until he was out of sight, and returned to his goblin city. The foolish merchant followed the goblin's advice and had his jars broken, throwing away all the water. Not a drop of water was found ahead, and thirst overwhelmed the men. They marched until sunset, then unyoked their carts, forming a laager and tethering the oxen to the wheels. The oxen had no water to drink, and the men had none to cook their rice. Exhausted, the group laid down to rest. When night fell, goblins emerged from their city, slaughtering every man and ox. After devouring their flesh, leaving only bare bones, the goblins departed. The foolish young merchant became the cause of the entire group's destruction. Skeletons were scattered in every direction, and the 500 carts remained with their loads untouched. The wise Bodhisattva waited for about 6 weeks after the foolish merchant had set out before beginning his journey. When he left the city with his 500 carts, he reached the wilderness's outskirts. There, he had his water jars filled and gathered a sufficient water supply. He assembled his men in camp and addressed them, emphasizing the importance of using water only with his approval. He warned them about the poisonous trees in the wilderness, instructing them not to consume any unfamiliar leaves, flowers, or fruits without consulting him first. With these instructions, he ventured into the wilderness with his 500 carts. As he reached the middle of the wilderness, the goblin appeared on his path, similar to the previous encounter. However, the Bodhisattva quickly discerned the goblin's intentions. He thought to himself, "This is the waterless desert, and there is no water here. The person with red eyes and an aggressive demeanor casts no shadow. Most likely he persuaded the foolish young merchant before me to discard all his water. Then, when they were weakened, he likely devoured the merchant and his men. But he doesn't know my cleverness and quick thinking." Addressing the goblin, he shouted, "Go away! We are businessmen and don't discard our water until we see where more will come from. When we find a new source, we can be trusted to lighten our carts by throwing away this water." After the goblin had ridden a little further and disappeared from view, he returned to his home in the demon city. However, once the goblin was gone, the Bodhisattva's men approached him, saying, "Sir, those men we encountered mentioned that the dark green streak of the forest is ahead, where they claimed it's always raining. They had lotuses on their heads, water lilies in their hands, and were eating the stalks. Their clothes and hair were soaking wet, with water dripping off them. Shouldn't we discard our water and travel faster with lighter carts?" Upon hearing this, the Bodhisattva called for a halt and gathered his men. "Tell me," he asked, "has anyone among you ever heard before today that there was a lake or a pool in this wilderness?" "No, sir," they replied. "It's known as the waterless desert. We just heard from some people that it's raining a bit ahead, in the forest." "Now, how far can rain wind carry?" asked the Bodhisattva. "About a league, sir," came the reply. "And has anyone here felt this rain wind?" "No, sir." "How far can you see the top of a storm cloud?" "A league, sir." "And has anyone here seen the top of even one storm cloud?" "No, sir." "What about a flash of lightning? How far can you see that?" 4 or 5 leagues, sir." "And has anyone here seen a flash of lightning?" "No, sir." "How far can a person hear thunder?" 2 or 3 leagues, sir." "And has anyone heard thunder here?" "No, sir." The Bodhisattva concluded, "These aren't people, they're goblins. They might come back hoping to devour us when we're weak and tired after throwing away our water as they suggested. The merchant who went ahead of us probably wasn't clever and got tricked into discarding his water, then got eaten when he got tired. We'll likely find his 500 carts just as they were loaded. We'll come across them today. Let's move on as fast as we can without wasting a drop of water." Encouraging his men with these words, he continued on his journey until he reached the 500 carts, exactly as they were loaded, and the skeletons of the men and oxen scattered in every direction. He had his carts unyoked and arranged in a circle to create a strong defensive camp. Ensuring that his men and oxen had an early supper and making the oxen lie down in the center with the men surrounding them, he and the key members of his group stood guard with swords in hand throughout the 3 watches of the night, eagerly waiting for dawn. At daybreak, after feeding his oxen and completing necessary tasks, he replaced his weaker carts with sturdier ones and swapped his common goods for the most valuable items among the abandoned goods. He continued to his destination, where he traded his stock for goods worth 2 or 3 times their value. Returning to his city, he hadn't lost a single person from his entire group. The master finished the story and then said, "This is how it happened, layman. In the past, the foolish ones met a tragic end, while those who adhered to the truth escaped the clutches of demons, reached their destination safely, and returned home." As the Buddha, he expressed the lesson on truth through the following verse. Some proclaimed the sole, matchless truth, but false logicians spoke otherwise. Let the wise one learn from this story, and firmly grasp the sole, matchless truth. The Blessed One further explained that following the path of truth not only leads to 3 happy qualities, the 6 heavens of the sense realms, and the virtues of the higher realm of Brahma, but ultimately results in attaining arahatship. On the contrary, walking the path of untruth leads to rebirth in the 4 states of punishment, or the lowest human castes. The Master elaborated on the 4 truths in 16 ways, and at the end of this teaching, all 500 disciples achieved the fruit of the first path. After delivering the lesson, teaching, and sharing the 2 stories while connecting them, the Master concluded by identifying the birth. Devdutta represented the foolish young merchant of those times. His followers were like the followers of that merchant. The followers of the Buddha were akin to the followers of the wise merchant, who was myself.